everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. Oh, my fig tree. Bring the fig over here. I'm Nicole Flores with Dennis's 70s, and today you are watching a video on growing edibles in containers. And that includes a fig tree, which I had just forgotten off screen. So thanks for the readjustment. There's lots to talk about with this topic. It is possible to grow a wide variety of edible plants in small spaces and in containers. There is a handout, as usual, that is accompanying this discussion. It has more detailed information on like container size and how many plants of certain crops you can grow per container size, and also some specific varieties that we list that are known to be compact or small, smaller plants. So, or appropriate for containers, I would say. So if you cannot find that handout, just make a mention in the comment section, and we'll attach it to you in a reply. But otherwise, it's just right below the title of this video. When we talk about growing edibles in containers, it's not the fact that you are limited in space, or that you're trying to garden perhaps on your balcony or on your patio. The biggest factor that affects what you can grow and how well it's going to grow is the amount of sunlight that you have. I guess next factor would be whether you can really water the plants. So if you don't have access to water on your patio, or you're worried about like runoff or drip to the next floor or something, that's going to be another challenge. But you're still able to at least try to grow something that requires full sun, and just figure out the watering. So full sun, 6 hours or more, is the most important for getting some of our warm season crops like tomatoes and eggplant and bell peppers to really fully ripen and be productive. The same goes for the more perennial or long-lived food crops that we can grow in containers. The fig, as I mentioned, really does want full sun. Our blueberries, we can grow citrus here in containers with a little bit of protection in Portland, Oregon. A olive tree that's actually beginning to give us olives. 6 hours of sun or more is really important for most of our food crops. Now, if you are gardening in a space that receives less than that amount of sun, so 4 hours or less, things that fruit, and vegetables that give us a fruited crop like a zucchini or a tomato, you may not have a lot of success with fruiting plants or vegetables. But leafy greens and quite a nice selection of herbs are both options that you should be able to grow. So lots of salad greens, from lettuces and European, mesclun mix and fancy European greens, to radicchio, kale, Swiss chard, and then the list goes on into, as I mentioned, quite a few herbs. And even on a tomato scale, for example, the larger the fruit of the tomato, the more sun the plant really requires to ripen that fruit. So with 4 hours of sun at best, you should be able to get a cherry tomato plant to ripen for you in a container in that kind of less than direct full sun. So we'll talk, we're going to talk about more of the specifics of the crops. But as I mentioned, probably the most important thing is how much sun you get in your space. Now, the type of container, the type and the size, I guess, is probably the first and most basic thing to begin with, because you are either growing in raised beds, for example, which are confined, defined or confined spaces that you're probably trying to make the most of, so you still will benefit from plants that are compact. or you're growing in, long rectangular boxes or plastic, kind of basic semi-decorative, but lightweight plastic pots that can either stack up when not in use, but, be available on your porch or your patio and not take up a lot of weight. Or what these plastic pots are supposed to look like is the true traditional terracotta pot, the more heavy-duty orange clay, oh, this is heavy, that we see here, which is ceramic, so heavy, and of course, a little bit of a different growing environment from plastic. The type of container, so wood, which is great, cedar boxes or whiskey barrels or half wine barrels, those are an excellent large container where you could actually put your fig tree in, for example, or an olive, live years and years, and then underplant around it with, maybe another, herb or food crop. So wood containers are great. Plastic containers tend to hold more moisture, but watering doesn't evaporate as quickly from a plastic container as they do from like the rough terracotta. The rough clay that's unglazed tends to lose moisture kind of the sides of the container over time, so they can dry out a little bit more, which makes it great for certain plants like an olive tree, like a citrus, like a fig wouldn't be bad. Not ideal for blueberry that loves to stay moist, or not great for lettuces, for example, that we want to, keep kind of regularly hydrated so that they don't get bitter in the summer months. So the type of container matters, and the size of the container matters, both diameter or length and width, and the depth of the container itself. You will see on the list, on the handout that we give you, the basis of most of our container sizes, where we kind of start with, is essentially a 5-gallon pot. Now this is a little bit larger than a 5-gallon pot. This here is a 14-inch diameter, so it's a 14 inches tall and 14 inches wide. But in this size container, we can grow quite a few things without stressing or straining them for water. And the smaller the container, you might be able to grow lettuce, for example, in a smaller pot. But while you're gone through the day, perhaps the small container will dry out so much quicker than a large container does, that the possibility of your lettuce ending up on the bitter side because of that inconsistent watering, or just drying out too many times, creates a bitter tasting greens. So your container size, which affects your ability to water, will down the line affect flavor on your plants. So go big, it's better, and the bigger the container, you could combine plantings, so it doesn't have to be like just an exclusive giant pot for your fig, but as I mentioned, you could put other plantings in with it. In fact, probably a good time to show off what a cute container this is turning out to be. It's plastic, so it's not too hard to move, but this is in a 14-inch pot. And this, if you can kind of see the whole assortment, we have some ripe lettuce that is pretty much ready to harvest. I've got culinary thyme going off the side. We have just a nice ornamental petunia, and then another ornamental on this side, kufia. Hummingbirds love it. But some herbs. So I see 3 lettuces. 1, 2, oh, the sage is over on the edge here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 herbs. 2, 1, 2, 3, 4 herbs. 2 colorful flowers. And then is just about ready for harvesting. And at this point, we'll just take the whole thing, and that will now give the herb flowers the rest of the container to fill out. But we could have been eating this lettuce leaf by leaf instead of waiting and taking the whole head off. So if it were just me, and I'm growing this out on my balcony and it's lunchtime and I'm working from home, that's the way I'm going to eat it. Is I'm going to take leaf by leaf. Maybe I'm going to pick 3, 5 leaves for my sandwich today for lunch, and then I'll let the rest of the plant sit there and grow. So awesome if you work from home, and you begin to plant things on your balcony or porch. How fun to just go out and forage your lunch. What a thrill to spend 30 minutes in your garden, eat whatever's ripe, maybe bring something in the house, throw together a pasta salad or something like that, and then back to work it goes. But in the meantime, you've had something fresh as well as a chance to get outside and pick it and enjoy it, like I will with a piece of. See, it's just perfect. And if you keep them growing, then you have the freshest, just picked lettuce that you're eating instead of trying to keep it from wilting or preserve it in your refrigerator. Now, lettuce, you could grow it from a 6-pack. I didn't bring any lettuce in. Obviously, you know what I like. You can grow jumbo packs of lettuce, little started lettuces, plant them together. Maybe, depends on whether you're growing a lettuce that turns into a head like romaine, or if you're growing a leafy lettuce that you're going to just be able to pick leaf by leaf. You could either plant them a good 6 inches apart. Romaine gets pretty tall and upright, but it's sort of skinny. So if you recognize it at the store, it's that more narrow oval shaped lettuce. Whereas something like butter crunch or a butter lettuce is a rounded ball of lettuce, of just delicious goodness. A little bit more space, maybe 8 inches to a foot between butter lettuces, 6 inches between a romaine style, and then the leaf lettuce. It doesn't really matter. I mean, you're going to keep picking the leaves anyways. So, I don't know, 3, 6 inches, as long as you are harvesting the lettuce regularly. Because let's face it, on something like lettuce, what are you waiting for? I mean, if it is a romaine style, then perhaps you're waiting for it to make a head. But even then, while you're waiting for the romaine to make a head, you could eat a couple of the leaves and throw those on your salad. We're not waiting like we would for an eggplant or a fruit producing or vegetable producing plant to actually ripen something. Lettuce is pretty much ready to eat as soon as it comes up. It is also a great plant to grow seed, and while our soil is still in that perfect cool, warm for summer but not too hot zone. Like my ground soil today was 62. The soil, the pots on my deck was 64, where it's holding a lot of the heat now from the previous day, so it's not getting as cold at night. The containers and things above ground are warming up and staying warmer, and my earth is just kind of like slow and steady. It's above 60 now, but it's been an odd year here in the Portland, Oregon area. And so a lot of things are very late, very delayed. We've had a ton of rain and unusually cool weather. And it's this is one of the latest seasons in my garden history that I will be putting in my warm season vegetables. So I have not yet planted my tomatoes, my peppers, my eggplant, my cucumbers, zucchini. None of those plants have gone into the ground yet for the season, and that is because of the cold and the wet combined. But even if it had gotten a little bit warmer, which it has, it's so wet that some of these plants, just their tiny root systems, they get overwatered and they just begin to just wither and wilt. And of course, at the same time, we're battling like epic sized slugs of, you know, gargantuan proportions, and lots and lots of other kind of challenges that come with the moisture that seem to get a little bit easier as the weather dries out a little. So we're now getting into a more traditional summer gardening pattern after this rainy weekend, I guess we're going to have. So things will be drying up and getting warmer, and I will be putting in my garden finally looking for shorter season crops. So just kind of the tomatoes that I will be growing, there will be a lot less of the 85 and 90 day plus spring tomatoes, and I will be choosing more Oregon Spring and some of the Russian or Czechoslovakian hybrid or heirlooms that are shorter days. I may plant New Girl or Early Girl, which is in the 60-something days, and some cherry tomatoes, again, because they're very prolific and I will get a lot, no matter how kind of crummy or great the summer growing season turns out to be. So back to containers and container sizes. It is, as I mentioned, the bigger the pot, the better. But some of these edibles are short season, like our lettuce, 45 days basically from transplant. At 45 days, the lettuce is pretty much done, and it's ready to be harvested or removed before it starts to actually go to seed. Now we'll take all that lettuce and eat it and give space in that container to some of the plants that are going to continue to grow throughout the season, like all those herbs and flowers. The same would go with, you know, in your own container plantings. If you've got limited space and you're growing in smaller pots, plan to rotate out some crops and plant things. One thing like a tomato, this is, well, let's look at this tomato. This is Sweet Million, which is a 60-day, but indeterminate. So this is a cherry style, kind of tall, viney tomato. Sweet Million can go in a large pot, so 15-gallon container, which is pretty good sized. And right now we'll put a cage on it so that it's got support as it grows. But we could put kale, we could put lettuce, we could do even something like cilantro or basil or other herbs at the around the edges of the tomato. And because we're looking at 60 days for this to start ripening, we'll be able to eat that lettuce in 45 and pull it out by the time the tomato gets big. Or our cilantro or our basil, just kind of continue to harvest that until the plant that's in the pot, the biggest plant in the pot, starts to kind of overtake and overshadow the companion plantings. Then you just harvest it all and now devote that container to tomatoes exclusively. The soil that goes inside your pot, well, so ideally it is a quality potting soil. It could be raised bed mix if you are filling large containers, but raised bed mix also is really a bulk filler. So our raised bed with G&B only has a small amount of nutrition, which means that I'd encourage you to mix it up with something like the Harvest Supreme or a soil builder that's got some chicken manure or a little bit of kick to it, a bigger nutrient package. Or you could just straight up use the G&B potting soil, our kind of standard outdoor organic potting soil. Of course, this is a small bag, which is nice and convenient to show off on the video, but we do have these in larger sizes. This one has, as it says, everything in it, no need for mixing, and it is all organic. But this is still, the soil we use in our pots only has so much nutrition in it. We would not use just dirt that we shovel out of our lawn area or out of our own landscape beds. Earth and the soil that we have in the earth is different from potting soil. So just make sure that you're using something that's meant for containers and container planting. It still is important that as we plant, we add fertilizer for a boost of nutrition that's going to feed the plants as they grow over the long haul. So again, we'll get into that in a minute, but the basic GMB indoor-outdoor is excellent for almost all applications. And then there will be some specialty plants that you may want a more specific potting soil for. And that would be something like a blueberry, which blueberries prefer acidic soil conditions where the GMB potting soil is balanced to pH 6.5. Blueberries would prefer to be almost a point lower, so 5.5 or so. So an acid planting mix is best for blueberries. And then we actually, for our citrus, which again, I'll talk about a little bit more in detail, but we have GMB's got a citrus mix. This is palm cactus, and citrus mix, which is also good for succulents, but is a little bit faster draining, has a little bit more pumice in it, which helps the soil not hold as much water as it gets kind of rainy and wet here in the, well, winter and spring and sometimes fall and summer. But paying attention to the type of soil you use and the quality of the soil will begin setting you up for success and has a lot to do with the outcome of your yield and how productive your plants are as well. If you are reusing soil from past years, if you grew last year in the soil and you grew something like a tomato, which is just known to be a heavy feeding plant, then be sure to recharge that reused soil. It's okay to reuse the soil, but boost it with some added nutrients, whether that is blended up of your own compost from home. Maybe you've got rabbits. Rabbit manure is great to mix in with old soil. We also use worm castings, which is available by the bag, or again, something like a soil builder such as Harvest Supreme, which has 15% chicken manure and kind of reintroduces some like chunkier, bigger organic matter bits that will help to keep the soil loose and viable and reduce that kind of compaction that we get from using soil year after year. It is most confusing things about growing edibles in containers is understanding and learning how to water our plants. And I mean, honestly, that can be just as difficult in the ground. It's that when we grow in containers, watering is more critical and really all on us. It's done more frequently because the plants can't root out into the ground, obviously, so they have limited resources on their own. And often when, if it does rain, water doesn't fall into the containers or doesn't really water them properly. And it's, rare, I guess, that we have irrigation systems set up for like our balconies and raised beds, although that is something that you can look into in the long run. But having an irrigation system doesn't always solve your problems on whether or not you can figure out how well to water the plants. Now, think about, here again, we'll start with, here is our 14-inch container. Oh, it's always, if you buy these plastic pots, I mean, it looks like it has holes. It should have holes, but only one of these holes is actually poked all the way through as a hole. So we must have drainage in the container. Very, very important. This can like they're poked with. I poke it tuners, but get the opened up. There's just a little tiny seal of plastic still sitting there. But if we had a container such as this size, and today we plant 2 bell peppers, or 2 types of peppers in this pot. We could, there's a sweet ruffled pimento, a really yummy, like a pimento pepper. So that is one we're going to do. And the other one, I mean, we're pretending anyways, right? But it's fun to talk about. The other one is a heirloom called Sweet Pepper Cornito Gallo, a half size of the Corno de Toro, exceptionally sweet and attractive. It's a more when it's a half size pepper, it is also a more compact or kind of smaller plant in general. So 2 peppers in the pot. We can space them out. They don't have to be centered, but we're going to give them kind of, a good 4 inches apart, maybe 2 inches from the edges of the container. They'll be able to grow nicely in here. But think about, okay, I have to put one down. Think about the size of roots right now. This is about worth of root in this container. And when we plant it in there and fill it full of soil, there is still only roots in the top 4 inches of dirt, which means that if we water this pot, the water is going to go down into the soil. The soil is going to stay moist and probably kind of hold the water for a while. If the sun comes out and evaporates moisture or heat at the top, it's going to start to dry the soil from the top down. It's not drinking it up from the bottom because, again, remember, the roots are up in the upper story right now. There's no roots down here yet to drink the water that is in the wet soil at the bottom. That means a newly planted will need like with less volume and possibly more frequently until it begins to root out through the container. And as roots go further down, it will be able to make use of moisture down on the bottom of the pot. So it's easy to overwater a newly planted container accidentally because the bottom is soaking wet, but we see the plant on top maybe is, flagging or wilting in the afternoon sun because it just can't keep up, and it doesn't have access to that moisture down there. It's not a bad idea for any new planting to give it a little bit of temporary shade. So that's, maybe an umbrella patio umbrella that you move over to block some of the hottest afternoon sun, just so that plant can kind of get itself adjusted while it roots out. You have an advantage when planting in containers in most cases that they can be moved around in the first place. Move it, start out in a more shady location or a little bit more sheltered and eventually move it out into a brighter sun or hotter, into that more full sun environment as it gets itself adjusted. So watering after the plant has filled the container with roots. So after it's grown substantially, doubled in size, filled the pot with roots, yeah, you're going to be watering totally differently by then. You're watering longer, wanting to thoroughly soak the pot and have water run out the holes in the bottom, assuring you that the soil is now holding as much as it possibly can and is beginning to, it's like the sponge is as full as it can and now the water is just running out the bottom. And that is probably something you will do every day in the heat of the summer. So the warmer and hotter it is, the more frequently you'll be watering. Ideally, plants are watered first thing in the morning while it's still even kind of cool out so that they can go into the heat of the day hydrated. But in containers, in hot patios and decks and, full sun situations, you will most likely have to water at the beginning of the day and then again later in the evening or towards the afternoon. For some of us, it's like before you go to work and when you come from work, watering those pots, especially the smaller container sizes, just to keep those plants hydrated enough so that we don't affect their flavor or their productivity. You can mulch containers to help reduce that evaporation from the top of the soil. And a lot of us know about mulching at home, but we are, mulching in the ground and in landscapes. But we don't always think about putting a layer of mulch on our containers. But mulch on top of the soil can just cover and slow the beating sun on the soil, which pulls moisture out and heats the plants up and just kind of cooks them anyways. Mulch could be reused wine corks, could be moss or bark chips or straw or compost, lawn clippings. You don't want it to be full of weed seeds, of course, but mulch can be all kinds of things, and a nice at least 2-inch thick layer of mulch is going to reduce how much you have to water, or how frequently you have to water, because you don't have so much evaporating out. It is pretty common, as I mentioned, that the flavor of plants can be affected by inconsistent watering. So any type of greens and I mean, some greens are meant to be bitter, but a yummy tender butter lettuce will suddenly just taste bitter and off. Sometimes even get thicker and more just harder, thicker skinned or thicker texture if we allow those plants to go too dry. So be affected. Tomatoes, peppers, beans, these plants are using a lot of water in the activity. So as a tomato plant is large and full of flowers trying to ripen fruit, tomatoes are using a ton of water, and it's getting pulled out of them in the heat of the sun. So we need to consistently keep a tomato plant watered to allow it to keep pulling up nutrients such as calcium as it's growing. And calcium is important for fruit formation, and we see an effect in the fruit of inability to pull up the calcium, either already in or just inconsistent watering and unavailability of that calcium, and that's blossom end rot. And blossom end rot is a really common issue that many of us have dealt with in the tomato, especially where the bottom end of the tomato starts to kind of get discolored and maybe sort of leathery or sunken. That's where the blossom was or falls off. It can be overcome. So if you've come home from work one day and your tomato, or a couple of days, your tomato is totally wilted, and you run over and water it and it seems to perk back up, it's possible that that is a latent effect of that type of inconsistent watering as you see that fruit develop poorly. If you do better on your watering from here on out, you can have the fruit kind of correct itself in mid-season and be able to produce good fruit that's unaffected or has less likelihood to be affected after you've changed those patterns. Now, fertilizer, as I mentioned, it's a must. Fertilizer for edibles is really, for containers specifically, but edibles in general, providing them with nutrition, specifically things that are heavy feeders like tomatoes, is going to make a difference in how productive the plants are. Now, I'm not talking about juicing them full of super toxic rocket fuel fertilizer. We are at Dennis and Somebody's, we focus mostly on organic nutrition in the first place. We have a great line similar to our potting soil. It's the same maker. Great line of slow release organic granular fertilizer. So granular fertilizer such as this can be added to the soil at planting time. So you can kind of incorporate it into the potting soil in the container, and then applied around the top of the plant about once every 4 to 6 weeks through the growing season to continually break down and slowly feed the plants. The potting soil itself only has a small amount of water-soluble nutrient that is kind of enough to get the plant established, give it the first couple of weeks of feeding, and that is while it's waiting for something to something like this other fertilizer source to break down and become available. You can also supplement either early on in the season while you're waiting for the fertilizer to kind of break down and take effect. You can feed with a liquid fertilizer, and the difference is granular, you shake it out as kind of powder on the ground. Granular fertilizer is longer lasting and a slower feed. Liquid fertilizer, which is again also available organic, so Miracle Grow, even though it starts as powder, you put it in water, that's a liquid fertilizer. This G&B, this is all purpose, but there's also a higher nitrogen or higher phosphorus version. This is a liquid fish and kelp based fertilizer that you it's concentrate, so you mix it down, dilute it with water, and then put it into a watering can or a bucket and apply it to your plants. Liquid fertilizer is water soluble nutrients. So as I mentioned, it's faster feeding, but has no long-term residual effect in the soil. So we can kind of get our plants off to a good start. I think of it as like a cup of coffee or an energy drink. And then this granular fertilizer is more of a substantial meal that'll carry me slowly through the day. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner is granular fertilizer. It is in pots, especially we are watering them more often. We're probably flushing some of that nutrient out a little bit prematurely even, as opposed to in the ground where we water less and there's more just kind of long-term resources that plants can get because of the earth and the trace minerals and all of the goodies in the earth. So it's a good idea, as I mentioned, to feed in containers every 4 to 6 weeks and evaluate kind of the look and, you know, the leaf color, the bloom performance, the overall yield performance of your plant will help you to gauge kind of whether or not it's time to do it or just get yourself on a nice schedule. It's pretty easy to remember. It is common, again, our tomato, vegetable, and herb fertilizer is great for literally almost all plants, but there is more of a preferred diet for something that's acid loving like the blueberry. You could give it the citrus and fruit tree fertilizer or the rhododendron azalea fertilizer. And again, our you know, there's some specifics out there. If I were to buy one bag and feed everybody, I would buy the tomato, vegetable, herb fertilizer and feed all the plants that. It is also pretty cool, all of the different kind of ways that you can grow in containers, and even include flowers, for example, with your food, and that way you're drawing in perhaps better pollinators or more, just adding more beauty and more multi-purpose to your plantings. Obviously the little lettuce and petunia one that I had is really cute, but this other container planting has mostly herbs in it. So we've got this beautiful culinary sage. The white flower is a fragrant edible flower, so if we wanted we could throw this into our salads and things, but it also attracts a lot of pollinators. It's sweet alyssum. And then there happens to be more herbs in here. We've got our sage, as I mentioned. This is a purple leaf basil, very fun contrast against the kind of bright colors of the sweet alyssum. This is a variegated lavender. In the back, it's called, or in the center, it's called platinum blonde. And then we have another culinary thyme. I love my thyme. So culinary thyme. And the other little beauty here that's giving us a bloom is literally like a Hershey bar in plant form. This is chocolate cosmos. And no, you can't eat it. It's just smelling it, though, is like the no calorie way of getting your chocolate fix. But chocolate cosmos is just a fun ornamental to throw in here. It's kind of wispy and pretty and smells really great. So we've got some fragrance, some whimsy. We'll get purple flowers coming soon off of the lavender. And then again, that sweet alyssum is lovely, and some functional herbs. So really just kind of an all-around, we got pretty, we got fragrance, we have something to eat. This pot's hitting a lot. Oh, and pollinator attracting. So we have a lot of multi-purpose that are achieved in a container planting such as this. And I could even, pick a few of these flowers as they bloom, bring them into the, house or apartment and have that further. Now it's given me a bouquet as well. So food, pollinator, fragrance, herbs and spices, bouquet, you name it. But there also are, so when you talk about containers, I mean, I know there's grow bags, there's so many options out there. You can go square. So this again, we're looking at a plastic pot, but there's beautiful cedar or redwood planters that last a long time. The galvanized livestock troughs, those are very popular these days and come in a range of sizes. Those are also great for growing in. The bigger the container, the more necessity you may have to move it around to clean your deck or, I don't know, push it around to follow the sun. Who knows what you're doing with it. But we can also help you to achieve that kind of silliness by having these fun little container saucers that have great wheels on them. They even lock so they won't roll away if you don't want them to. And that allows you to not have to be so confined, I guess, in your space, and move things if you need to and not be kind of locked in. If your space is small, sometimes we have to reconfigure things in small spaces. So it's easy if you can conveniently move them around. Going vertical is also a way to save space in growing. And so there are multiple options in going vertical. I mean, your basic cone shape or square tomato cage can be used not just for tomatoes, but you can actually add a little bit more like string or twine to those guys and grow peas or beans up them. A cucumber could be grown easily on a hoop configuration like you see on the label here. We've got 3 bamboo hoops. You basically turn them into kind of a tower or a dome. This is a 3 foot. I'd go maybe 4 foot with my bamboo. We have those 2. Just push those into the container like you see, and that gives things with tendrils such as peas or cucumbers or beans something to grab onto as they go up, and that saves you a ton of space, even sometimes allows you to grow something around the base or the bottom of those plants in addition. So ways to go up is kind of nice. Vertical gardening is always a space saver. And other space saving techniques basically include, as I mentioned, a lot of varieties of plants, edible crops that have been specifically bred now for small spaces. So a lot of our summer veggies that we think of as being really big and taking up a lot of space, there are almost in every instance a smaller or more compact variety on the market. Starting with tomatoes, because I think that that's one of the, well, I know tomatoes are one of the most common edible plants that people do grow. You have 2 types of tomatoes to choose from in general, and one is a determinate tomato. Usually it has it on the tag, the words determinate. Determinate tomatoes stay short. I give you examples on the handout, but this is Oregon Spring, and even this plant is going to get to be decent enough size to maybe utilize a cage, but a determinate variety doesn't necessarily need a cage. Could have a stake for a little bit of support, but determinate tomatoes grow 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. They tend to produce most of their crop over a 3-week period, and then they're done. So you can ripen your tomatoes, pick all your tomatoes, a bunch of salsa or sauce, and then pull the tomato plant out completely. It's not going to give you any more tomatoes, and put in another crop, and it's only like mid-August or whatever. So you could put in a fall crop of something to continue your harvest of a new vegetable into the season. A determinate tomato could grow in minimum size 5-gallon container, or again, here I've got our 14-inch. So by the time this matures, it's going to use all this pot and have filled the whole pot with roots. But this is minimum size for a determinate tomato. The other kind of tomato is viney, larger growing, and is considered an indeterminate tomato. Most cherry tomato varieties are indeterminate. This is Sweet Million, Sun Gold. Most tomatoes in general are indeterminate, and so they are larger. Viney need a bigger container, so 3 times at least the size of this. Ideally a 15-gallon container, or maybe 20-inch diameter is a good pot size to grow an indeterminate tomato. And they definitely need a stake or a trellis or support of some sort, because they just get big and they'll fall over and ramble all over everything, and definitely not be compact. But again, that's an example of going vertical. You'll see, whether you're looking in seed catalogs, spinning seed rack at a local garden center, or just shopping a selection of vegetable starts, you will see varieties that are high. If you read the tags, you'll see that they highlight themselves as being compact. I highlight a few. For zucchini, I mean, zucchini and squash in general are just like a renowned plant that takes up a lot of space. It is common to have zucchini running, all over the garden and filling your garden paths and that kind of thing. And zucchini is another one of those plants that's also pretty prolific. So it is rewarding when we have a regular harvest of zucchini, to the point where sometimes people are looking to give extra zucchini away or figure out what to do with it. But the compact series, this is Tasty Patio Yellow, and then there's a variety called Tasty Patio Black. 2 compact varieties of zucchini that end up at about 3 by 3. They are non-vining, so just a more compact plant that still produces regular 8-inch, good sized and very yummy zucchini or squash. So Tasty Patio is one variety to look for. Space Master Cucumber, another variety that is great for small spaces, but still gives us that regular market sized length cucumber. So Space Master Cucumber is a great one, but it could also be trellised. If you didn't grow Space Master, you could grow another cucumber and just let it grow up on a trellis or support. Forgot I have this kind of cool trellis netting as well. So this is kind of a heavy nylon string type trellis apparatus that you could string between posts, or add onto your fence, for example, to let your crop grow up. Leaf pickling cucumber, another small Tom Thumb pea, Little Gem lettuce. These are like tiny lettuces. Little Bells or Mini Bell sweet pepper, Little Finger or Parmex carrots. I've got here today, but again, carrots do better from seed, so look for, the thing about these is they're shorter, so you could grow them in window boxes if you had to, or shorter pots, and not be trying to get a carrot that might, by the time it gets regular carrot size, is like touching the bottom of your pot. So Little Finger, the short one. Parmex, and I think this is yes, Parisian Market. Parisian Market and Parmex are round carrots. Round like little orange balls or pumpkins. This is a really quick, easy to grow in shallow soil variety. It ripens in like a month, like 35 days from transplant, and you have carrots. But again, well, we buy a 6-pack, jumbo pack of carrots like this. You should have 6 plants, but instead you have like 60 plants because they haven't been thinned. And there's no way that we could plant all of these. One's already like dangling, so that guy we thin. But otherwise, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I see like 6 starts in here of carrots. Even an inch apart is too close together. I would put my carrots maybe about 3 inches apart. So this is way too many. It needs to be thinned down to maybe 2 plants as you plant it. And then a few weeks later, you're going to thin that down to 1 plant so it can develop a carrot in enough space, especially if these are going to be round ones. They need to have some space this way, so there's no way that all of those plants together are going to be able to survive. But you're also not successfully going to be able to like separate them out because all of the roots are intertwined. So the best way to do that is to just thin, like snip them off at the soil line and thin them that way. So thinning is important, but that's like basic veggie gardening in general. Okay, as I mentioned, don't even get me started on the list of herbs, berries, and fruit trees that are great for containers. Just know figs, as I mentioned, blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, and gourmet herbs await you. About blueberries, a little bit more about blueberries. This is a particular variety of blueberry that, again, the commercial plant breeders have been working to bring us crops that we can grow in smaller spaces and as our gardens get smaller and things. And this is a series that's called Bushel and Berry. And the Bushel and Berry series includes Sunshine Blue, which is just the first of a ton of blueberry varieties that are low growing and compact. They are heat tolerant, a little bit more drought tolerant. They're just able to grow in containers and have no problems with that. Sunshine Blue is already forming delicious little berries, but it won't be ripe until probably mid to late July. And they are self-fertile, so one blueberry will get you plenty of blueberries, but if you plant 2 different varieties of blueberries, you will have like triple the blueberries because of the cross-pollination that happens. So you would plant Sunshine Blue here and find another of the container-appropriate blueberries, such as Bountiful Blue or Peach Sorbet, or there's many, many others. And you would plant that other blueberry in its own container, somewhere where the 2 plants were kind of close enough to see each other if they had eyes, but they wouldn't be planted together in the same pot. Blueberries do want to be in a large enough container that you can keep them fully hydrated with your watering, because they have a shallow root system that does not respond well to drying out again and again and again. So a couple times you might get away with it, but if you let a blueberry dry out too many times, it's just not going to make it. Over here I've got a dwarf bay. So this is the like culinary bay. If you do, pasta sauces, lots of soups and stews use bay leaves. This is a variety called Little Ragu. And Little Ragu only ends up at like 6 to 8 feet tall. It's an evergreen, fast-growing, easy care, full sun plant. And 6 to 8 feet may not seem little to you, but the standard bay tree or bay becomes a tree that's like 20 feet tall. So you'd still want to harvest on this on a regular basis and dry it, and maybe send it to friends and cook a lot with it, and that way you'd keep the bay in a size that's more appropriate for your back patio or your deck. But again, herbs, just like veggies, are meant to be harvested. The gosh, so many herbs. As I mentioned, I've got chives over here. Cilantro is great in containers. As you see in some of these pots, we have sage. Well, culinary sage also can be really pretty. This is a golden sage. This is tricolor sage. Just actually, little accents in your containers. Another real pretty accent that's low growing and sort of becomes a filler spiller. This is golden oregano. So some oregano grows tall, but this golden oregano is sort of a low ground cover with that beautiful chartreuse foliage. Rosemary, lavender, as you see in the other container. These are evergreen, upright herbs that do well in a wide variety of soils and often even take less than full sun. So you could grow a rosemary in partial sun and still get a really great harvest. Smells really great, and of course tastes even better. So lots of fun with herbs. And basil, I just grabbed again some fun basil because it's finally time that basil is looking good and isn't hating the weather like it has been for the last month or so. Some really fun varieties of basil. I've got spicy bush basil. This is Greek basil. Both of them smell so good, but they're tiny. Small leaves on the Greek basil, kind of small and bushy, you can see on both the spicy bush and the Greek. So lower, more compact, great for just like a couple of leaves you want to throw into a salad, or just add into a quick pasta sauce or a casserole without having giant leaves to chop up. These just rip up really easily. And then one of my favorite basils, which I talk about whenever I can and when it's available. This variegated basil is called Pesto Perpetuo. It's one that looks kind of specialty or weird. I mean, you've got like the purple leaf basil and Thai basil and all these others. Pesto Perpetuo is a variegated leaf basil. It has a little bit of a licorice or anise flavor to it, but it does not make a flower and won't go to seed. So it's one of those basils that is a little bit easier to grow if you're always frustrated with the need to kind of pinch and try to stop your basil from flowering. I mentioned peppers, lots of great peppers. Bush beans. This is Blue Lake bush bean, which beans can be super productive. The more you pick on beans, the more they'll continue to produce for you. So you can grow bush beans without having them on poles climbing everywhere. Easy to pick. They do want they don't want to dry out again. So a nice big container or something that's kept regularly watered. And then if you can go out every day, every other day, and harvest and pick beans, you'll have more and more and more beans. Very satisfying to grow. Eggplant, well, this is little finger eggplant, which is a early mini oriental type. 55 days, delicious, delicate flavor on eggplant little finger. Eggplant really does like it hot, so I wouldn't have even dreamed of planting eggplant until this next week or so when it's finally really nice and warm for us. If you're not an eggplant fan, try a different variety and look for a new recipe, because there's lots of fantastic ways of cooking eggplant, especially kind of like Cajun style or New Orleans style if you try any of those. And they're beautiful plants to grow. So I think they really add a lot to your container gardens when you're growing edibles. Also, kales. We talk about lots of greens, but kales, chard. Most greens do best in the cooler weather. So kale and lettuces and chard are great growing early in the season and kind of harvesting about now. Planting again in August, for example, and harvesting it through fall and often even through the winter. Kale at this time of year can be prone to aphid infestation. They grow kind of quickly and want to go to seed sort of quickly when the weather turns. But if you get a 6-pack of kale, such as this, or if you plant from seed, at this point in kale's life stage, we could actually begin to harvest this kale in more of a cut and come again method. And that way you'll be eating it more like baby kale rather than allowing it to get completely, go completely to harvest. So this is dinosaur kale, 65 days. You know, it makes those like really deep, heavily quilted, kind of long, slender leaves, not the frilly, like Russian kale. But when we harvest and cut these as baby kale, you're going to basically put your fingers kind of right on the soil surface so that you don't cut into the crown of the plant, and then cut everything above the little crown. The crown is where the brand new leaves are just coming out of the center. So the crown we don't want to disturb, but we could cut everything above the crown level on our crops and come into the house with a pretty nice harvest of kale from that cutting. And then giving those plants about 3 weeks, those crowns will regrow in about 3 weeks' time to be back up to about the stage where we can do that same harvesting process again. And it's usually about a total of 3 harvests of that style that you can do before you've kind of exhausted the planting, and then you're just going to start over again with a new planting. Or you've used either like a long container and you've replanted, like sow every 2 weeks, sow more kale seeds so that you can have some at a different stage and ready to be harvested while you're waiting for the next kind of sowing to grow, and then sowing that last section, which will ultimately come into ripeness as a cycle as you go through them. Olive, I guess I have to mention my olive that's sitting here. This is a hardy European olive. This is one called Kironiki, but Arbequina is another olive that we can grow here in the Pacific Northwest. We can see that it is already giving us little olives. This is a great one that is either an oil making olive or a table olive, so you can eat them either way. Obviously, if you are going to harvest olives at home, you've got to be prepared to either have a press or send them somewhere to make oil, or the novelty of just a table olive is fun. Lemons, my last citrus of all types, can be grown with some winter protection in the Northwest. This is a improved Meyer lemon. They are best in that ceramic, the unglazed clay ceramic containers, which allow moisture to kind of leave the sides of the pot or the walls of the pot. And again, in a container that's heavy like that, not a bad idea to give it one of those little rolling skateboards so that you can, in the winter, take it easily to a slightly more sheltered area for winter protection and wheel it back out into its rightful summer location without having to break your back or call a friend. Well, I'm hungry, and so I hope that it's definitely not too late for you if you have not yet planted your summer garden. There's still plenty to choose from at the garden centers. Because of it being such a late season, we have extended our offerings and continue to order new inventory. Come on in, talk to the staff. Lots of us have grown in pots for years, and many of us, it's our only way to grow. And we want to make sure that you find something that you can grow just the same as us to enjoy and savor this lovely summer ahead. As always, thank you for watching. Everyone, happy gardening.